All ye loyal classmates now in hall and campus through, lift up your hearts and voices for the royal red and blue. Fair Harvard has a crimson, old Yale the colors too, but for dear Pennsylvania, we wear the red and blue. Hurrah, hurrah, Pennsylvania, hurrah for the red and the blue. Hurrah, 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 hurrah for the red and blue.
My name is Sam Lundquist. I'm the Vice Dean for External Affairs at Wharton, and one of the great joys of this weekend for me is I get to make the rounds to a number of events as the official welcomer back to campus and to your reunion. So we appreciate you being here. We love the fact that you've made the commitment to be with us and to experience Wharton and Penn in its current shape and form, which I know is a little bit different from what you all remember. But that's why it's so important to have you back, is that as much as the university and the school has evolved and changed over the years, we love the heritage, we love the history, we love being able to go back to memory lane with all of you and understand the place that really allowed us to become what we are now. So thank you for being here. I do want to shout out to the leaders of who made this possible, and I think word is already circulated among the room that your leader, your current chair, Tom Haddock, couldn't be here today because he's literally stuck in New York with doesn't have an alternate route to get here with the shutdown. But he's here in spirit. He's going to come to campus to continue his good work with us as soon as possible. But in his stead, we have two of your former chairs. I'm going to say thank you to Jack for all that he's done. Jack Smith is undergrad 51 and MBA 52. And when I think about your class years, Jack, I'm wondering, were you called a submatriculant at the time, or did that not exist? A submatriculant, that you did the MBA so quickly after your undergraduate graduate.
What did I do of it?
Okay, I think you were the first maybe. Now they have a fancy name for what you did. It's called the submatriculation program, when you do the undergraduate and the MBA in 5 years. So it's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for all your service. And Carl Schaefer, who's a MBA class of 1957. Carl, where are you? Right here. Okay. Carl is going to stand in for Tom today and make some remarks. And so thank you for all your leadership and partnership over the years.
Thank you, Sam. You do a terrific job.
Thank you. Jeff comes to us from a multinational global perspective. He's a political economist who studied his graduate work at Duke University, both at the master's level and the PhD level. But he's also served as in 2 deanships prior to coming to Wharton to serve as dean here, both in Australia, one at the University of New South Wales Business School and the University of Sydney Business School. But his teaching and research experience has been largely in the US, but also in the UK. So he brings with him a very rich perspective of economy, of global, of economics, of business and management. And so it's just such a pleasure to have Jeff as our leader.
Thank you very much, Sam, and good lunchtime, everybody. It's a real pleasure as well as privilege for me to be here with you all today. I think I'm the luckiest person going because I think for me being Dean of the Wharton School is about the best job I could possibly have. But Sam knows, because I tell him this all the time, that I think there is an incredible guilty pleasure in my job, which is that I get to interact on a daily basis with people otherwise I'd have no right to interact with. Much more interesting people, much more impressive people, people with many more achievements than I ever had myself. So I love my job, and above all I love it because I get to interact with you all. When I am outside, and today's about the best day to do it, nothing says higher education to me the way Locust Walk does. And we are in a building that's on one side of Locust Walk. When I go and prepare for my Wemba speech, I'm going to Steinberg Dietrich Hall, which is on the other side of Locust Walk. The Wharton School straddles the center of the university. That centrality. Now, I thought Locust Walk was always that way. But I gather, is it really true that that used to be Locust Street, not Locust Walk out there? If any of you were in the vanguard of pushing the university to close down the street and make it a walk, I take my hat off to you, because that was a brilliant decision. So is anyone going to stick up their hand and claim responsibility for this wonderful move? Am I right? Do we know the year it happened? I'm thinking people in this room might know the year.
Pre-68.
Pre-68. Let's bid it down a little bit. Sam thinks it was about...
Late 50s, I think.
Late 50s? Anyone remember?
No.
Were people drinking too much at the time?
And the White House was on 39th and Wharton.
After 1960, but before 1968. We're getting smaller here. Any more precision? This is very important living history.
After 65.
65. Are you just offering that like an auction, or are you
Agree with that.
confident? So we're at the 50th anniversary of Locust Walk. So thank you all for helping me with that history. I'm going to quote you on that, by the way. I say I did some living history at Reunion. But that centrality of the business school to the university is something that I think we should all cherish. Because not only does it create incredible opportunities for us, it really positions us uniquely in the world of higher education. So thank you all for being here. As I said, I'm really sorry that I don't get to stick around now, among other things, to listen to and steal from Mauro. But I'm so pleased that you are all here. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And the last thing I should say is probably the most important. God, you all look incredibly healthy, and I love the energy in the room. Long may both continue. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Carl Schaefer. I'm just pinch hitting here for our fearless leader, Tom Hadlock. Those of you in the class of 65 may have run into him on campus, because I think your classes probably overlapped. Tom, as Sam told you, couldn't be here. He had really quite a difficult time because he has a house in West Hampton. So he was going out there last night, then he was going to come back on the train, then he was going to come down here on the Acela, and it just didn't work out at all. And so he asked me to pinch hit for him, and he's really very sorry that he couldn't be here, and I wanted to render you his best regards. I'm here now to introduce Rick Perkins of the class of 70, and he has a video that he wants to show you all. So, Rick, can you come on up and take over?
Being newly retired, I have a lot of free time. And I was walking around campus about a month ago with my new camera. Took some pictures, and they all came out great. And I thought, since I was working on this reunion, I said, why don't we do a reunion video, which will include the pictures that I took and pictures of our group from the class of 70, put it into a video and just have it as a remembrance of this event. So I had sent it to Helen, and she said, why don't we show it at the luncheon today? So I said that would be fine. This is not my profession, it's just something that I enjoy doing. So we're going to show it, and if the class, the Wharton grad class of 1965, would like to use it to combine to do a video of your class during this weekend, I'd be glad to make it available to you. But these are just the pictures I took of the university.
If I could save time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do is to save every day till eternity passes away, just to spend them with you. If I could make days last forever, if words could make wishes come true, I'd save every day like a treasure, and then again I would spend them with you. But there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you find them. I've looked around enough to know that you're the one I want to go through time with. If I had a box just for wishes and dreams that had never come true, the box would be empty except for the memory of how they were answered by you. But there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you find them. Looked around enough to know you're the one I want to go through time with. But there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you find them. Looked around enough to know you're the one I want to go through time with. If I had a box just for wishes and dreams that had never come true, the box would be empty except for the memory of how they were answered by you. But there never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you find them. I've looked around enough to know you're the one I want to go through time with.
His most recent books are Global Turning Points of 2012 and Emerging Market Rules, also that year. And he's an author and co-author of any number of other publications. It's a great pleasure to introduce Mario Gullin.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. Is the microphone working? Yeah. Okay, wonderful. It's really, this is the first time that I've addressed your group. Or for that matter, any of the reunions. So it's wonderful to be here. And I believe we have time until 3:15 or so, right? So we're going to do this in an interactive way. So I will throw questions at you, and I'm sure you're also going to have questions about the topic that I'm going to be telling you about. And let me just start by saying that as you can see over here, the topic is new business opportunities in the 21st century. So what I would like to do between now and 3:15 is tell you about where global markets are going. Okay, we're going to take a look at consumer markets. We're going to take a look at luxury markets. We're going to take a look at financial markets, especially currency markets. I just chose 2 or 3 things from the material that I usually teach at Wharton. To give you a sense as to what happens in the classroom these days. Okay, but I would like to actually run this as if it were a class. Okay, is that okay? Yeah. So I may cold call on you, so pay attention. Okay. But I think that's going to be, so much more enjoyable if we do it that way. Okay? No. You'll see that. And I brought with me 9 copies of Global Turning Points, the book, that covers some of the material that we'll discuss today. So I'm going to give those 9 copies to the people who ask really good questions. All right? Okay? So I have 9 of them. The most important thing that I want to accomplish is the following. So I've been doing research and teaching on this topic for the last 6 or 7 years. And that book came out a couple of years ago. And after a lot of number crunching, after considering many different kinds of trends that have an impact on markets, I think I can summarize all of the conclusions that I reached with just one number. Okay, so there's a lot of number crunching that is behind this one number that summarizes all of this effort. Okay, and the number is 2030. What I would like to do, just to put it simply, between now and 3:15, is to persuade you that in the year 2030, the world is coming to an end. Okay? Yes. The world is coming to an end. So I have an hour and 15 minutes or so to persuade you about that finding. Okay? Now, when I say that the world is coming to an end, of course, I don't really mean that the world literally is coming to an end. What I mean to say is that the world as we know it today is coming to an end. Okay? So I'm going to show you a number of trends, a number of charts, okay? And you will see that most of them, there is, give or take a couple of years. Around the year 2030, there's something really important that happens, okay? And that's why, I generally speak about this year as more or less the year in which the current state of affairs comes to an end. And of course, my message to the undergraduates and to the MBAs and to the executives that I teach here at Wharton is, well, you and your company better be prepared for this. Because unless you get prepared for this, you're essentially going to miss the boat. Or you're going to be so misaligned with what's going on around the world. Okay? Can you still hear me all the way around the room? Okay. All right. So feel free, once again, to ask questions, to jump in. And let me also say that I am not in possession of the truth. Okay? And if there's a Wharton professor that tells you that he or she is in possession of the truth, that's not the case. So please challenge what I'm going to tell you over the next hour and 15 minutes. Okay? Because there is a lot of room for debate and a lot of room for alternative interpretations of the data. Yeah?
Would you say again what you think influences the most important influence? You said 23?
No, the year 2030.
2030 is the most important
Conclusion that I've reached in the sense that
we should take away from this 2030?
Yes, so remember that year, okay? But what I'm hoping is to persuade you between now and 3:15 that there's going to be dramatic changes going on in the world that they're going to make global markets, consumer markets, financial markets very different. Now, before we get any further, let me just show you how I'm going to be making projections into the future. Because you see, it's very easy to make forecasts, right? I can tell you, well, I think the economy is going to grow, at 3% for the next 10 years, right? I mean, anybody can formulate a forecast. The issue, of course, is how credible is that forecast? Should you believe it, okay, or not? So I'm going to give you a very simple example to show you how I'm going to be making projections into the future over the next hour and 15 minutes, okay? And I've chosen here a very simple, extremely simple example, which is how many people, how many human beings are we going to have in the world, okay? Looking at the next 85 years to the year 2100. So right now, as you know, we have about a little bit more than 7 billion people in the world, okay? Now this is an important issue because consumer markets, financial markets, everything revolves around, hey, how many people do we have in the world, okay? And in a second, we're going to start thinking also about how much money they have to spend. But after the year 2013, what you see over here is 4 projections into the future. In a second, I'm going to ask you which you believe is the best of those 4 projections. Okay? If you had to choose one, I'm going to, I want to see what you think about it. But let me first explain what each of those 4 projections means. Okay? So the scale here is billions of people. And as you can see, the constant projection, I'll explain in a second what constant means. projects that by the end of this century, we're going to have maybe 29 billion people, which is a very large number. Today we only have about 7. Okay? Now what constant means in this context is that everybody in the world, including yourselves, including your children, your grandchildren, including myself, continue to behave in the way in which we have behaved. That is to say, if you guys had on average 5 children, but my generation on average only has 2 children, right? That no more change. That is to say, everybody continues to have the 2 children that my generation is presently having. I have 2 children, okay? And also that if today we live on average, let's say on average 75 years, that people continue to live on average 75 years. So that's a constant, meaning no change, okay? You just make the projections based on what's going on today. And then the other 3, the high, the medium, and the low, they give you very different numbers. The high gives you 16 billion, the medium about 11 billion. And the low actually gives you a population that is lower than the one that we have today. It's a little under 7 billion people. And those 3 projections, essentially, are based on different assumptions. All of them, essentially, reduce the number of children that people are going to have into the future. High, medium, or low, you know, they're just reducing that number by a lot or by not so much, okay? All right, so let me ask you the first question. You can only vote for one of the 4 options there. But the question is the following. So to raise your hand, okay? The question is, which of the 4 do you think is the most unrealistic? Yeah, the one that you think is just not very likely, okay? So hold on a second. We'll do this as a poll. So how many of you believe that the constant is the most unrealistic?
Most unrealistic?
Constant, yes. Okay, so about 60-65% of you. How about the high as the most unrealistic? Anyone? 1, 2, 3, okay. How about the medium? Couple of people. How about the low? Okay, so this is typical. Yeah. So,
Didn't you just ask?
the most unrealistic,
Most unrealistic is the constant.
according to you. Well, we're going to get there. So the results are that 65-70% of you thought the constant was the most unrealistic. A few were somewhere in the middle. Sorry? Unrealistic. Unrealistic. A few of you were in the high and medium, and then the rest, like 20% of you, were thinking that the low is the most unrealistic. So the majority is correct. Most unrealistic.
No, I didn't understand it.
Okay, let's do it again. What would you vote if the most unrealistic?
I think the constant to me
Is the most unrealistic. Yeah, okay. So you're in the majority. So the majority is correct, okay? You see, you should never, especially when you're thinking about 85 years into the future, you should never assume that behavior is constant, that people don't change, right? Because people are changing all the time, okay? So we've eliminated the constant. Now let's think about the high, the medium, and the low, okay? And now I'm going to ask you the question in the opposite direction. Which one do you believe is the best? Wait. Think about it. We'll take a poll.
Oh, the best one. That's right. The best.
Best projection for you. You think is the most realistic, the most likely? No. The most likely projection. The most likely.
For what? Finish the sentence.
The most likely projection of the 3. The most likely, the most probable.
But of the what?
Of the 3. Of the 3.
But what was I forgot what the whole
Okay, let me rephrase. So, you know what we have is, we're left now with high, medium, and low projections into the future. How many people are we going to have in the world? Okay? So,
Only planet Earth.
only planet Earth. Right. Only planet Earth. So how many people would say the high is the most likely projection? About 25% of you. How about the medium? Okay. Slightly more than 50%. How about the low? 15% then. Okay. So yes, the medium is the most likely. Because you see, whenever a professor like myself, or in this case, this comes from the United Nations, or a consulting company, gives you 3 projections into the future, and they label them as high, medium, and low, what they're really trying to tell you is that they believe that the most likely projection is the medium. And they just give you 2 other scenarios, right, so that you can get a sense as to, you know, what could happen if you change the assumptions, okay? Yeah?
So why would we believe the United Nations? First of all, they're not an out-of-the-box thing. They're not generally anywhere near imaginative. And frankly, I'm gonna guess, and I don't have an idea as to the
Yeah.
numbers, and I'm a black swan kind of guy. I'm thinking, I don't believe the constant, but I'm thinking the high perhaps could be the most likely because increased lifespan, increased wealth throughout the world, and that should lead to increasing population.
Yeah. So again, they take into consideration.
Grow.
They take into into consideration all of those things.
But we haven't, that wasn't, we weren't.
Yeah, and they do a lot of number crunching. They're pretty good, and they've been right most of the time. And then what they do is they present you with these three scenarios. So think about it, right? So you've told me that the medium is the best. Now we're left for a second with the high and the low. How many people in the room believe that the high is more likely than the low? Okay, about 40%. How many people believe that the low is more likely than the high? You're split. You're both wrong. Why? Because if the medium is the most likely, as you deviate from the medium, either up or down, they should be equally likely. You follow me? Okay?
How can you say we're both wrong? There is no right answer.
No, there is.
Why is there a right answer?
Because by design, when a forecaster gives you three projections, one is medium, one is high, one is low, the medium is supposed to be the most likely, right? And then as you deviate from the medium, they become less and less likely. Okay? All right? Yeah.
But isn't the forecaster assuming that there are some people who are even thinking better than the forecaster? Let me give you two examples. You come to Europe, you come to America, they're all practicing some form of birth control. They're not even sleeping
Yeah.
in order to produce anything.
Yeah.
Go to Japan,
Yeah.
go to Korea. Does it not sound right to you to imagine that apart from the Muslims who seem to be increasing, and apart from the Africans who are being told not to, I suspect you need to look at the low again.
You're absolutely right. So you're putting your finger on exactly what the issue is, which is that this is just for the world as a whole, right?
Yes.
And the problem is that there's so much diversity in the world, right? I'm going to show that to you in a second. Just hold your horse because we need to have some drama here, okay? We have an hour left. Hold your horse on that, okay? So just then remember the following. For the next hour and 5 minutes, as I give you more and more projections, I'm always going to be using the medium assumptions, okay? I'm always going to give you the medium. And it's perfectly fine with me if you believe that the medium is too low. Then what you should do is increase whatever estimates I give you. And if you believe that the medium is too high, then what you should do is just lower those estimates, okay? All right, so this is your point. Your point is that we're having fewer and fewer children in the world. So your generation, on average, had at least 5 children, right? My generation.
No.
Oh yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Worldwide.
So, yeah. Worldwide. So you look at the thick line here. Do you see it here? Okay. Today we're more or less here. So the rest is projections. Okay. Worldwide we start at 5. We dropped to 2.5 today, and then it's projected to converge onto 2. Now, in the United States or in Europe, these are the rich countries of the world. These are the rich countries. So your generation, you're absolutely right. We're talking about 2.5 on average, right? And it's it's been coming down. And then the thin line over here, these are the emerging economies. This is China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, Indonesia.
China's one.
Well, China, but then the others,
No, but
they have a
China
bigger.
is the biggest and it's one.
Correct, but India is almost as large, and it's not one, right? And then the dotted line is the very poorest countries in the world. Most of them are in Sub-Saharan Africa or Middle East or South Asia. And as you can see, they have more children, right? But what I want to grasp from this chart is that families are getting smaller everywhere, okay? Not just in the rich countries, everywhere, all right? The projection is that we are somehow converging on this number of 2. This is per family or per woman, right? That's the trend, okay? Now, of course, for the time being, families in the poor countries are much bigger, right, than they are in the rich countries. And you will see in a second how many consequences this has, okay? Now, the other side of the story, which is what you also mentioned, is how long do people live? And we know that people are living longer and longer and longer, right? So my generation is supposed to live maybe 6 or 7 years longer than your generation on average. But your generation, in turn, is supposed to live maybe 5 or 6 years longer than your parents, okay?
They're not reproductive.
Yeah, but they're living longer. The point is that they're living longer, right? Everybody's living longer, and on average. And look, that the other amazing thing is that the poor countries are catching up. They are, reducing the gap that used to separate them. Okay, you see that? Okay, that's a projection. Now, if you combine those two things that I've been telling you about, how many people are born and how long they live, then you can estimate. And this is the first chart that I hope you will find important in terms of understanding where markets are going. How many people will live in different parts of the world? So once again, here what we have is, from 1950 to the present time, we know how many people there are. The rest are projections, medium projections into the future, okay? And here vertically what we have is, what percentage of the world's population is projected to live in different parts of the world? Okay, what percentage of the total? Now, if you examine the chart carefully, there's one part of the world whose proportion of the world's population is going to go through this roof. Okay? Do you see it? Africa. Africa. Africa used to be, at the end of World War II, 9% of the world's population. Today, it's already 15%. By the end of the century, it could be nearly 40%. This is the median projection. Nigeria, which is the largest country, is projected to have more than 700 million. Okay. Is that going to happen or not? I don't have a crystal ball.
It's not going to.
It may not happen, but based on the knowledge that we have today, right? That is, the way things might look.
Is
now,
that a number of children with them?
oh, they have 6 or 7 children on average.
How many of the 5 children lived to?
Well, that's where the action is. So this is a very important question in the sense that what we are reducing very fast is infant mortality. That is to say, the number of babies that die before their first birthday. That's where the action is, right? Public health measures, better hygiene, better nutrition, that's what's helping. Now, you can also see that South Central Asia, this includes India, is also growing, but it's at some point starting to decline in relative terms, right? And then there's 2 big losers. Can you see them? There's 2 regions that are going to lose a lot of population. Eastern Asia, including China, right? So China is this one here. And this one here includes, in addition to China, Japan and South Korea. And then the big one here is Europe. Is there anybody here from Europe, other than myself? So we are a shrinking continent, right? They are a shrinking continent.
Where's your Muslim world?
Sorry? It's down here. The Muslim world is spread through several of these regions. So it's in South Central Asia, it's in a little bit of it in Western Asia. Okay, so it's spread through several of these regions.
Separated because it's certainly growing.
It is certainly growing, but they are very different. Morocco has very little to do with Indonesia. Both of those countries are predominantly Muslim.
The production of children is the same.
Very high, yeah. I agree. But they're in very different parts of the world, right? But look at Europe. It starts at 22%. Today it's only 10%. Projection is that it will be 5%. Right? I mean, Europe is really committing a form of suicide, right, in not having children, okay? So massive changes. Now, this has been going on for the last 50 years. I'm not telling you anything that is new, okay? 50 years, 50, since you graduated, right? Or some of you graduated. But notice that it will be around the year 2030 when those lines will start to cross each other. You see that? That's why the year 2030, give or take a couple of years, is so important. Because that's when all these changes are going to make Africa the most highly populated part of the world. Okay? Which it wasn't 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. That's why that year is so important. All of these things have been brewing for a long time, but they're only going to have massive impact over the next 10 or 15 years. Look at the map. This is where the population is growing the fastest. As it goes darker, okay, do you see it there? As it goes darker, that's where the population is growing. This is Africa. Some of you know Africa well. Africa is never going to be overpopulated because it's a very large place. So per square mile, Europe, the United States, China, India, Brazil, any other country pretty much is going to be more populated than Africa. Look at how many countries fit in Africa. Okay? No, but in terms of the landmass, okay?
We have 53.
In terms of the landmass, it's huge, right? Okay? All right. Now, one thing that you are, I'm sure, very keenly aware, if we're having fewer babies pretty much everywhere around the world and people are living longer, populations are aging, okay? So we have more and more people in their 60s, in their 70s, in their 80s, right? You can see that visually by taking a look at the population age pyramids, right? So what we have is men in blue, women in red. This is the year 1960 for the US. Here what we have is age groups, right? From 0 to 5, 5 to 10, and so on and so forth. At the top we have people who are above the age of 80. So very young population here, a lot of young people. This is the year 2010, the last year for which we have census data for the US. But you can see that it's already getting old. And this is the year 2060, right? The projection, getting older. Now the US is not a dramatic case compared to Germany. Germany is going to have a lot of people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. They're very well organized. I have family in Germany. I don't know how they're going to deal with that because it's very difficult to deal with that situation. Why? Well, because you've made promises, right? About pensions, about healthcare, about many things. And you're subsidizing or you're paying for them with the taxes that the currently working population is paying. But look at how very few young people they're going to have, right? Okay. The same is going to happen in China because of the one-child policy, obviously, right? Russia is a special case. I don't think we should spend too much time with it. But Brazil, it's going to happen in Brazil as well. It's going to happen in India more slowly. India is like 20 or 30 years behind in terms of these demographic trends, right? But it's also going to happen there. But let me just show you why you should care about this, all right? So let me show you an example about the US market for equity. You all care about equity investments, right? Sure. How many people here in the room are invested in the stock market in the United States? Everyone, right? Okay. So this is a study that was conducted by 2 economists at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Focus your attention on this chart over here first, okay? We have the time period between 1954 and the year 2011. Okay, that's the time period they studied. And we have 2 variables here. The red one, okay, you see the red one that goes up and down? That's the average price-earnings ratio for all US listed equity, okay? All companies listed in the stock market, what's the average PE ratio? Price-earnings ratio.
Issue weighted or
it's weighted by the size of the company, yeah.
market cap?
Yeah, market cap, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's that. It goes up and down because the stock market goes up and down, earnings go up and down. And then the blue line, which is very smooth, this is an indicator of the age structure of the US population. And to be precise, it's how many people in the US are between the age of 40 and 49, divided by how many people are between the age of 60 and 69. So it just gives you a sense as to the age structure of the population, okay? Now, do you see a correlation between the 2 curves? Do they move together? Looks like it, right? So, when the population gets older, what's going on in the stock market? Goes down, right? So why would that be? Why would it be the case that when the US population, you have more people in the in their 60s or their 70s, whatever it is, relative to how many people are in their 30s or in their 40s? Why do PE ratios tend to go down? That has been the case for the last 60 years, right? And vice versa, when the population gets younger, then PE ratios appear to go up. All right.
They sell their stocks.
Exactly. So it's portfolio decisions, right? Over the life cycle. People, when they're young, invest in more stocks. As they get older, they start cashing out or they move stocks into bonds. But another important reason is, think about what drives the US economy. It's consumption. We all know that, right? But in particular, it's consumption of durable goods. Automobiles, homes, electrical appliances, and so on. Who buys those goods? Young people, right? So the economy, right, doesn't do as well, right? Okay? Now, the authors of this study, if you take a look at the other chart here, they also did projections into the future. And they used the same assumption that I've been using, the medium assumption, using the UN data, the same data, okay? And they made the projections into the future. And they're projecting that up until the year 2024, there will continue to be downward pressure on US PE ratios as a result of population aging. After that year, you see the age structure will rebalance itself, right? Okay? And you will get that's why you get a slight increase, right? So it matters a great deal, right? The population structure, age structure matters a great deal, okay? Now, let me tell you something else that is going on that I think is also going to change the world, which is the growth of cities. In my view, even more for markets, for demand, even more important than the number of people in the world is whether they live in a village or they live in a city. Okay, the growth of cities. How long are you going to be here in Philadelphia? For 3 days, most of you? A couple of days, 3 days? Okay. By the time you go back home, there will be about 1 million additional urban residents somewhere in the world. That's the rate at which cities are growing in the world. 1 million every 3 or 4 days. And that's much faster than the rate of growth of population in general.
Is that migration plus births or?
Exactly, everything. So people who move from the village to the city, and whatever number of people are born in the city. So it's really rapid growth. Take a look at the maps. This is 1960. And what you see here is, you see the dots, cities in the world. The small dot is between 1 and 5 million. The next dot is 5, 10 million. The red dots is cities with more than 10 million. And at the time, there were only two, New York and Tokyo. You see them? That was 1960. That was a long time ago, right? This is 1970. This is 1990. This is today, 2014.
Those are metro areas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay? And this is the projection to the year in which the world will come to an end.
So perhaps, sir, you might
Yeah.
just define what a metro area is,
Yeah.
because it's far more than Philadelphia.
Correct. And New York, it includes Newark, New Jersey. Okay? And so on and so forth. Exactly. So this is the US concept would be the metropolitan area,
Yes.
right? Which is the one that is used by the federal government. But here, what you see is that there are 50 cities with more than 10 million people, and probably 20 or 25 of them with more than 20 million people by the year the world comes to an end. So, can you tell me which industries you think are going to benefit from this urban growth?
Before I ask that,
Yeah, hold on a second.
would it change if you had isolated Indonesia? Suppose you had isolated Indonesia.
Here?
Yes.
Okay.
And put it in the map. Would there be a serious change?
Just Indonesia?
Yes, because it is the most, populous Muslim
Yeah.
country.
Muslim country,
I'm
sure.
not a Muslim.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand. Well, but Indonesia is much smaller than India and China. You see,
Precisely.
what is driving this is obviously India and China, but also Africa, right? Because you see, today there are very few. Back in 1960, there were almost no big cities in Africa. Do you see it there? Okay. But today there's already quite a few big cities. And the projection is by the year 2030 there will be even more. But most of it will be India. You can barely see India here, right? Because there's so many cities, right? You see it there? And China, right? All of the Southeast Asia. So there's real estate, there's construction that are going to benefit from this. Remember, 1 million people every 4 days, okay? Additional urban residents somewhere around the world. That's a pretty fast rate of growth, okay? What other industries are going to benefit?
Drugs, healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare, entertainment, because people in the cities need to be entertained.
Agriculture.
Agriculture and food, I think that's the key one. Because you see, when you live in the village, you consume food and water including water, that is locally produced. And perhaps most of the time you actually produce it yourself. Once people move to the cities, you need to bring the water and the food to them. That is going to be, I think, we're going to talk more about food and water in the next 20 or 30 years than about oil. I'm convinced about that. I know a lot of wealthy people who are putting their money into food and water because they believe this is going to be huge, right? It's going to be, yeah. And you can see it already here in the United States, okay? Now, let's multiply how many people live in the world by how much money they have to spend, okay? Because this is also really interesting. So, this is the big news. The big news is that today, 2015, we still have more poor people. Poor people are the yellow area here, measured in billions, right? And orange is middle-class people in the world. Remember, middle-class people buy branded goods. They buy automobiles, they buy insurance, they want their own home. Poor people can't afford those things. They build their own, hut or whatever it is, right? They don't buy branded goods. So today, we still have more poor people than middle class. Down here, we have rich people. But more or less, in the year 2022, so about 8 years before the world comes to an end in 2030, for the first time in human history, we're going to have more middle-class people in the world than poor people, for the first time. Okay? Big change. Why? Well, because we're going to have a lot more consumers. Many, many more than we've ever had. But here's the mind-boggling thing. Take a look at the distribution of these by parts of the world, right? So today, 2015, more than half of the global market for middle-class consumption, so middle-class consumers, right, is located in the European Union and the United States. You see it? It's only going to take 15 years to the year 2030 when India and China combined will be more than half. And look at how tiny the US and European Union are going to be. It's only going to take 15 years. Today, Europe and the United States are more than half of the global market for middle-class consumption. Within 15 years, it will be India and China. Now, you all have a smartphone, don't you? Is that right?
Yeah, right.
On the back of those smartphones, this is just an example of how things are going to change as a result of this. There are two acronyms, two sets of letters. There's FCC and there's CE. You know what those things stand for? Federal Communications Commission, and CE?
European Community.
Yeah, European Community, right? And 10 years ago, it was only FCC, not the other one, right? Now, why do we have, on all of our consumer electronics, not just smartphones, why do we all have those two acronyms? Why?
Compliance. Regulatory compliance.
Regulatory compliance, certification, right? If you want to sell this product in the US market, it's made in China, as you know, or assembled in China out of components made all over the world. If you want to sell it in the US, you need the FCC to say, yes, you can actually sell it. It complies with certain standards, right? So I can assure you, and I'm willing to bet my pension fund, which is my largest financial asset, that within 15 years, we're all going to have a Chinese acronym here and an Indian acronym. Why do I say that? So today it's the US and Europe, right? But look at those numbers there. Why am I telling you and projecting that within 15 years we're also going to have a Chinese regulatory authority and an Indian one approving this product?
Let me make an observation.
Yeah.
Apple handheld, its big growth is coming from China.
Yeah, hold on, speak a little bit louder so they can hear
The
you.
Apple iPhone, its marginal, its big marginal growth is coming from China.
Yeah.
And I'm going to guess that ultimately it will come from India and the other lesser developed countries.
Yeah, yeah, correct.
No, I disagree. My view,
Yeah.
and it's quite a different view, you're not going to have the yuan or the Chinese money replacing the dollar. And that's where the problem is going to come.
Maybe. Maybe.
I'll go further.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in 10 minutes or so, what's going on with currencies. But to his point, it is the biggest markets that get to write the rules. And everybody has to play by some rules.
No, they won't be writing the rules, they'll be writing additional rules.
They will start writing additional rules. Why? Because they're going to become very large, right? And they're going to say, well, look, we're going to be very large by the year 2030. We also want to write our own rules. And so Apple or Samsung or all of these companies will have no choice but to also comply with the regulatory authorities in China and India.
If they want access to those.
If they want access to those markets. But they will want access to those markets.
There's no doubt, but I mean, it's
Because-
important to
right.
No,
put
but
that
Mr. Lecturer,
in place.
Yeah,
please, in order to be able to take a board,
yeah.
what you discarded, that it's so going to be so. Currently, China, Germany, Britain, they've all come together to undo the IMF and the World Bank.
Yeah.
Why do you think they're doing it? They're doing it because they want to unseat.
Absolutely. Because there are benefits.
Yes, there are benefits for them.
Absolutely.
So please.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that in a second. So this is a big change, and remember again, magically, it's going to happen around the year 2030 as well. Okay? That the US and Europe are no longer going to be more than half of the consumer market in the world. It's going to be China and India, right? Okay. Now you have specific numbers over here, but I'm not going to talk about them. In the interest of time, let's focus just for a second on now the rich, okay? The people who are millionaires, to be more precise. So the millionaires, also called the high net worth individuals, are people who have at least $1 million of investable assets, excluding the primary home, okay? So if somebody here in the room has more than $1 million, excluding the primary home, right? So it could be in stock, it could be savings, it could be a second home or whatever, then you are included in these statistics, okay? That's the way it works, all right? So the threshold is $1 million, okay? If you're a family of two, then the threshold is $2 million, okay? So they're counting here on a per capita basis, right? And what is undeniable, you can see here, is that since the crisis in 2008, we have more and more people in that bracket, okay, who have accumulated at least $1 million, excluding the primary residence. You see that there? Okay, that's in terms of how many millions we have, how many people. We can also measure this in terms of how much money they have. And here the figure is in trillions, okay? This axis here is in trillions. And we can see that since the crisis in 2008, there's also been an increase, right, in pretty much every region in the world, okay? Now, this is a ranking in terms of countries in the world. So the US has the most millionaires, the most people with at least $1 million, followed by Japan, and then Germany, then China. You can see the ranking there, okay? It's obviously large countries that are relatively rich, or are getting rich, like China, okay? Those are places where there's more millionaires. Now, interestingly, almost in every country, most people who have at least $1 million tend to be above the age of 50, because it takes time to accumulate wealth, okay? Unless, of course, you're like Mark Zuckerberg, and you become a millionaire at age 22, okay? But most people cross that threshold, accumulate $1 million when they're 50, they're 55, they're 60. Most people, right, who manage to cross the threshold. Now, this is where I want you to focus your attention. Women are becoming millionaires at a faster rate than men these days, okay? And I have a series of questions to ask you about.
They're more capable.
Yeah, they're more capable. They get better grades in my classes. Yeah, so they live longer, exactly. So today, it is estimated that 40% of all the millionaires in the world are women. And remember again, if you're married to somebody who's also a millionaire, we're counting both of you separately, okay? Now, before we get any further, why do you think so many women are accumulating at least $1 million in the world?
Because they are honest. They're more honest than the men.
Because they're more honest. I will disagree with that. And I have 2 daughters. I'm very happy about it.
Alimony. They live longer.
They live longer? And what's the implication of that?
They have longer to accumulate wealth.
They have longer to accumulate wealth. They can work longer and
Better educated.
yeah, they're getting better educated. They have a career now and they can inherit. They can inherit. Okay? Exactly. So, yeah, I'm going to give you later. So, I have very good news for the women in the room, okay? Which is that you're going to be rich if you're still aren't, okay? Now, let me restate my assertion here. What I'm trying to say is that for any woman living today, the probability that that woman is a millionaire is much higher than the probability that her mother or grandmother or great-grandmother were a millionaire, okay? That's what I'm trying to say, that the probability today is much higher, right?
That's a stacked number because you know that the woman is going to inherit from her spouse.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
Right.
So it's going to, when you,
Yeah,
normal
yeah.
age for men is after 65, you're going to be having more.
Correct. And the difference between men and women in terms of how long they live has continued to expand, right? However, at the same time, also women now work in greater numbers. So they're also accumulating their own wealth. So it's both things, right? And I have very bad news for the men in the room, including myself. So what's going to happen to us, especially to me, those of me like myself in my generation? What do you think is going to happen to us while the women accumulate all that wealth? They'll hire us. We're going to be dead, right? Because we live shorter lives on average, okay? So this is the world we're going into. Okay. Now, you remember that painting by Botticelli? It's in London. So I would like to ask you a series of questions, the same question that I ask my students, and I'm going to give you what the evidence tells us, okay? About the following: whether men and women come from the same planet, or, according to the painting, right, women come from Venus and men from Mars, okay? So I want to ask you a series of questions about consumption, about savings, and about investing behavior, comparing men and women. Be very careful with what you say, because this is a very slippery topic, okay? You can get into a lot of trouble here, okay? So the first question is about saving money. So how many people here in the room believe that when it comes to what proportion of the income gets saved by men and women, both save about the same proportion?
No.
Nobody? So how many people would say that men save more money than women?
No.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, how many people would say that women save more money than men? Okay. This is normally what happens. So the reality is a little bit more complicated than just one or the other, okay? Because it really depends, as you can see over there, it depends on the age of the man and the woman. It depends on their marital status, whether they're married or not. And it also depends on, in their own particular country, whether men and women play equal roles, or they are very, unequal, right, in terms of the role that they're supposed to play. So for example, single women tend to save more than single men, especially if they're not planning to get married anytime soon. All right? This is true pretty much across the world. However, men save more than women when they are preparing for marriage.
Yes.
Makes sense, right? Okay? This is true pretty much in all countries around the world. Now, this is what really baffles me. In countries with traditional gender roles, for example, Saudi Arabia, right? Where women have very few rights, as you know, okay? Women's higher earnings result in higher savings. So when the women actually makes money, they save a lot of money, more money. However, in countries like the United States, or Europe for that matter, with more egalitarian roles, more equality between the genders, then the reverse is true. When women make more money, they actually save less. Which I find, interesting, right, to say the least, okay? That's the reality, right? Yeah.
So, an observation.
Yeah.
In those gender role countries, women are under pressure and understand how important it is to be
Correct.
free. So
Correct.
they're going to save their money, which is sort of like a security blanket.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you.
In the U.S., women are making a lot of money. They expect to continue on. They're focused on appearances oftentimes, and not necessarily, certainly at the young age. And as they get older, I'm going to assume they save more.
And that also tends to be true. Okay, so again, this is a very complicated issue. The last point that I want to make is that in the US and Canada, women contribute less than men to their retirement accounts. There's very good data on this.
Single moms.
Yeah, they don't have enough money, right, to save, because they need to, okay? Now, how about when it comes to consumption, okay? So how many people here in the room believe that men and women buy the same kinds of things? How many people here believe that there are differences between the two? Okay, most of you. Could somebody give me an example of a major difference that you observe? And remember, we're talking about people who have money right here. So, in what ways do you think men and women spend their money differently?
Conspicuous consumption.
Conspicuous consumption. So who
On the
engages
part
in
of
more?
men.
Okay. On the part of men.
Yes.
Okay.
Buying
So,
horses.
yeah, so they buy different kinds of luxury goods, right?
More
But you
men
see-
will buy a Tesla car than women.
Yeah, okay. But the biggest difference, you know what it is? It's actually in services. So women, especially women with money, are far more likely to spend money on education. Not only for themselves, but also for their children and their grandchildren. And they're more likely to spend money on healthcare for them, for their parents, and for their children and grandchildren. They're more likely to buy insurance, right? And remember, the service sector, at least in the United States, is what, 65% of the economy? Okay. So this is going to have a big impact. In fact, it's going to be very good for people like myself. If we have more rich women who want to spend more on education, that's good for my, okay?
That's about to change. Just so
That may be changing. All right? Now, last set of questions. Once you've spent the money, remember these are rich people, you're left with your savings, how do you invest the money? Okay, so the question is very simple. When it comes to investing money, how many people here in the room believe that men and women pretty much make the same decisions? Okay, how many people believe that they make different decisions? All right, so could somebody give me like a sense as to what do you believe is the most important difference between men and women when it comes to investing money? So speak loudly, more loudly, William.
Women are more conservative.
What do you mean?
No,
the women are,
They take less risk. So this is a common, right?
women are risk averse.
Exactly. So this is something that,
Not true.
yeah. Let me give you the evidence in a second. What's your name? I'll come back
She
to
has
you.
lots of evidence.
What's your name?
So we have it good.
Okay, I'll come back to you in a second, okay? But let me first take a poll. How many people in the room believe that women are more risk averse than men? Okay, so you see it's a majority, right? But we'll see if they're correct.
They're all men.
Right. We're gonna go in a second. Now, some people, but not me, don't tell the dean that I said this, okay? Some other people claim that due to this effect, that women are more risk averse than men, if instead of having had Lehman Brothers, we had Lehman Sisters, there wouldn't have been a financial crisis, okay? That's an exaggeration, okay? However, in trading rooms, there are very well-run experiments that show that a man and a woman, same age, same level of experience, same education, they're making trades, and the man always is more risk-oriented, right? And also trades more frequently. So systematic, even in the same firm, the same trading floor, the men and the women traders make systematically different decisions, okay?
So what's the evaluation?
Short-term change in price.
Correct.
Not necessarily.
Correct. So to your point, you're actually correct in many ways, right?
Oh, of
Because
What's the breakdown, what's the evaluation of that?
the risk aversion, well, what kind of
What's
assets
the
you
outcomes,
buy?
the boys and the girls, what's the outcome?
Well, what kind of assets you buy, investing,
I'm
right?
sorry, who makes more money?
Or who makes more money? Yeah, over the long run, that would be a good indicator. But let me show you.
They will be on a different scale.
Yeah, hold on, we have a question there, and then I'm going to get back to you.
Are
Yeah.
women more likely to invest in land?
Than women?
Women, no, women more.
It depends on the country, actually. Let me give you what we know, right? Which is what you see here. That in general, like as the majority said, it tends to be true that women are more risk averse than men. However, the more financially knowledgeable a man, the more risk averse. Okay? So if let's say the man comes to Wharton, right, and becomes more knowledgeable, he becomes less prone to investing in risky things, right? The opposite is true for women. Can you believe that? Women, the more financially knowledgeable they are, meaning they come to work and they get an MBA or they get an undergrad, they become more like men, right? They become less risk averse. Okay? All right? And some surveys and experiments, I'm reading the third point here, also show that women tend to be more risk averse than men when it comes to saving and investment, okay, in the following two ways. Let's see if this makes sense, okay? Now, women tend to underestimate the probability of high likelihood gains. Meaning, the men get very excited about, oh, we're going to make all of this money, right? And the women are much more, guarded, right? Okay? And then the second thing is that women are more pessimistic when faced with risky decisions in general. I don't know whether this resonates with your experience, but that's what we find in experiments, right? What people have found in experiments, when running experiments, okay? All right, so.
Well, excuse me,
Yeah.
but that would make more sense, because
Absolutely.
women, when they have the tools, and men, when they have the tools, are going to move to some sort of reasonable middle.
They converge, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To make
Yeah.
decisions that are more appropriate.
Exactly, but that again shows, right, I totally agree with you, the power of education, right? And how it actually tends to level, the playing field, so to speak, right? It kind of reduces the attitudes, right, or the prejudices that people have, right? Okay, let me just rotate for the last 20 minutes or so into the last topic that I have for you, which is not so much about people and how much money they have to spend, the middle class, the millionaires, but about global financial markets and in particular currencies, because I think we're all affected by all of the turmoil, all of the volatility that we see in global currency markets, okay? So before I show you the first chart, which is actually very simple, okay? Let's see if, so don't look at the chart yet, okay? Let's see if we can agree on two basic principles about how the global economy works, okay? So the first principle is that there are countries in the world over here that export more than what they import, goods and services. We agree? And there are countries over there which import more than what they export. So far, so good? Good. That's the first principle. The second principle is that if there's a country in the world over here that exports more than what it imports, it must necessarily be the case that there's at least one other country over there that imports more than what it exports. I'm assuming here only one planet, no interplanetary trade. Okay, do we agree? This is really important. There are a lot of politicians out there, I've met some of them, who do not understand that concept. They believe that a surplus over here can occur without a deficit somewhere else in the world, or vice versa, right? They believe that somehow a surplus can exist in isolation of a deficit, right? And that's not possible, right? We all know that, right? Okay, so what we have here is something very simple. We have, and by the way, all of these PowerPoints, you will get them next week. You're going to get an email from Wharton thanking you for coming, and there's going to be a link to the file, okay? But essentially, what we have here is starts in 1980, okay? And it goes to the year 2014 with actual data. And then it's projections to the year 2019. So for 5 years projections by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Okay, those are projections made by the IMF. And what we have is above the zero line, you see the zero line? Okay, you see it? Above the zero line we have the countries that export more than what they import. They have surplus. And so we have the oil exporting countries, we have Germany, China, Japan, and we have a few other countries in Europe, like Denmark or Switzerland or the Netherlands. And then we have other countries in Asia like South Korea and so on and so forth. All of those countries export more than what they import. Okay, goods and services, counting both. And then below the zero line, we have the countries that have a deficit. They import more than what they export. And so we have the US with the largest share. And then we have so-called deficit Europe. That includes my dear home country, Spain, France, Italy, the UK, Portugal, Greece, you name it, okay, Italy. And then we have other countries around the world.
Does that include intra-Euro market?
Yes, yes, so we're treating each European country as a separate country. Okay, and that's actually a very good question, which begs the question as to why don't we treat them as one block? And the answer is very simple. No such thing as one block in Europe exists, right? And if you don't believe me, just go over there. Because they're bickering over every single penny right now, right? It's not one.
Make the point, one currency, not one block.
Exactly, absolutely, okay? And one currency, not for long either. So the important thing about this chart, though, is not that we have countries that have a surplus above the zero line and countries that have a deficit below the zero line, but rather that the imbalances, the deficits and the surpluses have become way bigger. Can you appreciate that? So back in the 80s, back in the 90s, they were equivalent to less than 1% of global GDP. That's the scale. The scale is percentage points of global GDP. Do you see that? Somehow, before the crisis, they got way bigger, right? 2%. They came down a little bit, but they're still bigger than what they used to be back then. Do you see that? The imbalances have grown bigger, right? Okay, if you take a look at just 1 year, this is the year 2013, the last year for which we have data on all countries around the world, we have the usual suspects. So the surplus countries, we have Germany, we have China, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, the Netherlands. Notice something really important, which is that China is not the country in the world with the largest surplus. It's actually Germany. But Germany has a deficit with China. So with whom do you think the Germans generate a surplus? With the US a little bit. A little bit.
With the rest of Europe.
With the rest of Europe. Okay? It's actually 65% more or less with the rest of Europe. Now try to explain to a German voter who's a very frugal individual, a big saver, that they have to bail out the Greeks. Because that's where they sell their stuff. Right? It's a very convoluted argument, right? You see what I'm saying? That's the problem in Europe, right? And then over here, we have the US, which accounts for 29% of the deficit. And then we have the UK, Brazil, Turkey, Canada, and so on and so forth, okay? Now, quick question. If these countries over here, every year, they buy from abroad more than what they sell to the rest of the world, how do they pay their bills? Well, how do they, who gives them the money? These guys over here, right? Okay. All right. And what do they sell them? They sell them assets, right? Like treasury bills or something else. And these guys essentially are giving them the money And they're giving us the money so that we can continue to buy from abroad more than what we sell from abroad. I'm not saying that that's bad necessarily. What I'm saying is that that's the way it works. Okay? All right? Okay, now, I'm going to run a little experiment on you over the next 5 minutes to see if we can see exactly, assess what the situation with the dollar is and with other currencies in the world. But first, I want you to take a look at 4 maps of the world. This was the world in 1914. So this was the eve of World War I, 100 years ago. Okay? And what you see over here is capital flows in the world. Okay, so we have the larger the circle, the more important that country was, either as a source or a destination of capital in the world. You follow me? And then also the width of the arrow is proportional to how much money was flowing from one country to another in 1914. Okay, you see that? Now, fast forward 50 plus years, 1967, and you have the same information. You see it? And then fast forward to the turn of the 21st century, about 15 years ago. Okay? And then this is the situation today, year 2012. What I did here is I put together all the European countries into one, just to see the overall picture. Okay? So, what would you say has changed in the world over the last 100 years from the point of view of capital flows? Let me just show them to you again. 1914, 1967, 15 years ago, and today. What has changed? China, Asia is a player now. The US is a very big player. But hey, over here, we only have one country that really mattered, right? The UK. The UK was so dominant, right, in the world of finance. And it only took a few years for the UK to actually lose its preeminent position, right? And then the US became more important. And then here we start seeing Asia coming. And now we have, Asia becoming very important. And inevitably it's going to become more important in the future. And also India is going to become more important. Okay, so let me just, yeah, go ahead.
Isn't that a function of perceived opportunity?
Well, that and also how the real economy is evolving, right?
Yeah, but I mean, in the sense that you talk about water, you talk about agriculture.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
on my list as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are really preeminent opportunities in those other worlds, China, India, etc.
Absolutely.
So projects that can garner excellent, if not outsized returns, are going to attract capital.
Well, but it's also a function, but this is mostly a function of who's got surpluses and who's got deficits. And the capital flows from one place to the other,
Yes.
to a very large extent following, those.
And also the cost of production.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely.
At the same time.
Absolutely. This is very aggregate, right? Yeah. Just a second. Hold on. Yeah.
Okay, what do you do with China where 8% of their exports go to Hong Kong?
Yeah.
And that's every month.
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually it's even worse, more skewed in terms of investments, right? A lot of Chinese investment first goes to Hong Kong and then they invest somewhere else. So this is a tricky issue in terms of how you do the accounting, right, of the flows, because
I mean, it's not Hong Kong part of China.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Okay.
But before you,
Yeah.
why wouldn't Americans, look at this issue and don't allow China to overtake them?
Okay, that's where we're going. So give me 5 minutes. I need a volunteer.
Do something about it.
Okay. So what's your name over here? Peter, can you be the volunteer? You can keep on eating. That's okay. So I've taken out of my wallet 4 documents. Okay, 4 pieces of paper, and we're going to discuss them in the next 5 minutes. So Peter, you said, right?
Yes.
So Peter, imagine for a second that I owe you $1. I have a debt with you. Okay? And I offered you 2 ways of paying you back. Okay? One is to give you a dollar bill. All right? And the other one is to give you a personal check of mine, written to the order of cash for $1. Okay? And signed by me. So which one would you prefer?
Not yours.
Which one? No, come on. You're very kind. Which one would you prefer? Most people would take the dollar, right? Okay? Now, why would you take the dollar? Give me a reason.
cash on hand.
It's this is also cash.
No, it isn't.
Of course it is. It says cash. This is a piece of paper. This is a piece of paper. But this is underwritten by Uncle Sam. And this was by myself, right? So say you trust Uncle Sam more than you trust me. Is that right? Okay. Moreover, I told you at the beginning, or you were told that I'm from Spain. Had I been from Germany, maybe you have taken my personal check, right? Okay? All right. So one is trust, right? The difference between these two documents, right? Now imagine for a second, Peter, that I tell you, I'm sorry, but I don't have a dollar bill. Here's my personal check. You're not going to see me again in a few months. Here's your money. What would you do with the personal check? You would run to the bank, right? Okay, right away. Whereas if I were to give you the dollar bill, what would you do with it? Put it in your pocket, and you would probably forget about it, knowing that you can use it everywhere, not just in the United States, you can use it everywhere. So the other very important characteristic of money, right, is convenience. It all boils down to trust and convenience. Can we agree on that? All right, good. So now, yeah, go ahead.
Just 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
You're going to give me the hook.
So very quickly, this is another check note. It was written by a very famous painter, Salvador Dali. You know him?
Yes.
Okay. This is a true story. Okay, you see it here? So I think this is, I made it up, right? But he went to a restaurant in New York in the 60s. And he paid with a personal check, and he gave it to the waiter gave it to the owner of the restaurant. And of course, the owner of the restaurant would typically send the check to the bank. But that day, he decided to draw a little sketch on the back of the check. Do you see it here? And then he signed it, and then he gave it to the owner. And the owner, when he looked at the back, he said, wait a minute, this is no ordinary check. Right? And instead of sending it to the bank, he framed it, and he put it on the wall of the restaurant. This is a true story, right? And then he went to another restaurant and did the same thing. And he was looking at his bank statements, and the checks were never deposited, right? Okay. So he thought to himself, I can print my own money. Now, this is a true story. At some point, of course, the restaurant owners understood what was going on. The price of the drawing in the market went down, right? And so it became better for the restaurant owners to deposit the check, right? Do we agree? All right? Okay. So what's the implication of this little story, which is a true story, for the dollar? For our dear currency. What's the implication? Yeah.
Supply demand.
Yeah, there's too many of them. Because once again, this is a piece of paper. Since 1971, there's no gold backing this up. This is a piece of paper. It's as good as the trust that we have in the issuer authority, right? In this case, the U.S. government, Uncle Sam, right? Yeah.
But let me make an additional point here.
Yeah.
That was then, and today, the signature of Salvador Dali, along with that drawing, might be far more valuable than it was.
Yeah. Well, we just saw over the weekend. We just saw over the weekend a Picasso painting going for 100 and I don't know how many millions of dollars. Right? But here's the point. This is the current allocation of reserves in the world. You see, when countries accumulate assets, right, because they have surpluses, they keep their money in what they think is a safe currency. And what you can clearly see is that the US dollar has been declining. Do you see it over here? Right? Today it's about 61%. The euro has also been declining, although it was gaining ground relative to the dollar for a few years. Okay? And then down here we have pound sterling, and we have the Japanese yen, and the line at the very bottom, that's the Swiss franc. Okay? This is the problem that we're confronting, and I think this is also going to hit the world around the year 2030, is that you see, the United States used to provide 60, 70, 80, 90% of this to the global economy, reserve assets, right? But the US, this economy of ours, at the end of World War II, was more than 50% of the global economy. Do you have a sense as to what percentage it is today? 22%, 23%. And there's no way that number is going to go up. Quite on the contrary, it's going to keep on falling. Why? Because the Indian economy, the Chinese economy, other economies are probably going to grow faster, right? So there's a big mismatch in the world. 60% of the reserve assets, but only 22% of economic activity. I want to leave you with this, right? Because in the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to have to resolve that issue. Because this country, our country, I'm also a US citizen now, we are reaching the point at which we no longer will be able to provide that service to the global economy. I'm not the only person saying that. It's like a law of gravity. If you are the largest economy, you can do it. If you're not the largest economy anymore, you can do some part of it, but not all of it, right? But you know what the problem is? Which is the economy that is about to become the largest in the world? China. And then maybe India, right? Do you trust the Chinese money? Will you put your hard-won, wealth into securities denominated in renminbi? Obviously not, right? Nobody really wants to do that, not yet, right? We have a big problem. This is going to generate a lot of volatility. Some people argue, and this is also discussed in the book, that digital money may actually come to the rescue before all of this unravels, right? Who knows? Maybe. But that's a futuristic kind of projection, right? So I want to leave you with that thought, right? With this I will end. Number one is, look, the population in the world is shifting around, right? Africa is going to become really important. Not only that, people are migrating from the countryside to the cities in big numbers. Remember, about 1 million more people by the time you go back to your home, right? Okay. Number three is women are getting richer, okay, at a faster pace than men. And this may have implications for financial markets because if they are more risk averted, like most of you said, well, maybe that has an implication. Or not, right? Like you said, right? And then the last step, the really big thing that we need to resolve, and this is something that is going to affect your grandchildren, which is essentially my children, right? Is how are we going to find a replacement, a partial replacement for the US dollar? The same thing happened to pound sterling, okay? It's going to happen to the dollar. Because it gets to the point that the country was once dominant, economically and financially, but it no longer is, right? Because other countries are also stepping up, right? In the ladder of development, and you can no longer provide the world with 80% or 90% of the reserve.
But do you realize if the U.S. will sell some of its oil, it will be able to reverse?
About 1/3 of the U.S. trade
I don't
deficit.
know whether it's 1/3, but thinking
About 1/3.
Okay.
The problem is that at the current price in international oil markets, there's no more investment in here in the United States, for that matter, in many other parts of the world, because it's not profitable, right? You need at least $70 or $80 a barrel to make those investments profitable. But I agree with you that on the long run, the U.S. will become not only self-sufficient in oil and gas, but possibly also a net exporter. And that's going to reduce the trade deficit. But you see, right now it's widening again. Why is it widening? Because suddenly the dollar is a little bit stronger. But it's not because the dollar is strong, it's because everybody else's currencies are very weak. Right?
You want help?
Yeah.
Take the deficit.
Yeah, I know. So I know you may have other questions. Given that we're running out of time, I'm happy to stay for a few minutes and we can discuss that offline.
I want to thank those of you from the class of 1970 for sending in the questionnaire. We have a total of 148 classmates who submitted questionnaires. I sent it out as a PDF file weeks ago so you could see it before the reunion. We want to give you all a copy of the hardcover. It tells you a lot about our classmates. Like I said, 148 of the 600 and some in our class actually completed the questionnaire. And it tells us a lot of interesting things about our classmates. How many majored in finance? 37% of the 148. 25% majored in marketing. On the career side, 38% actually worked in either finance or investments or in banking. 51% of us are now retired. And I think that about 8 of us said they will never retire, and the rest are still working. 70% of us are active in volunteering with nonprofits. Where do we live? Well, I think about 85% of us live in the U.S. With no real concentration, 9% in Pennsylvania, 8% in New York, 7% in New Jersey. Florida had 7%, and 15% of us, or 88, actually live in other countries. What's that? Your term, not mine. Anyway, 80% of us were, or actually are married right now. 86% have kids, and 61% of the 148 have grandchildren. So I think we got to know a little bit about each other. I wish we had gotten twice as many questionnaires, but we'll keep on trying. If you're in contact with other people, tell them they ought to get a copy of this questionnaire and send it in. I will say also that only 49% of our 148 people are in touch with any other classmates. So what we want to do is give you this hard copy, which we promised we would give to everyone who came here, with all these questionnaires. The school actually did the copying. They did a beautiful job of making it available for us. So we'd like to...
Only for our class.
Yes. Oh, sorry, class of 65, you'll have to do your own. But I don't think you'd be interested in ours anyway.